Hey everybody, it's Crafting Journey and it's freezing out here and I didn't even wear a hat. So today we're going to talk about the new trial, the retrial of Mark Jensen, and I got some updates for you in other trials that are coming up this year. Stay tuned. Everybody, welcome back to another edition of Crafting and Crime Daily, the show where I recap live trials, and a new trial started yesterday. I can't wait to tell you about it, but first I'm going to tell you about some updates on some other trials that are coming up this year, including the trial of Charles Adelson for the murder of Dan Markel. Charles Adelson is accused of plotting the murder of his sister's ex-husband, FSU law professor Dan Markel. He hired, allegedly, 2 hitmen to go up and murder Dan Markel. Now, I've already done 2 trials on this. The first trial was the hitman and the girlfriend, Charles's ex-girlfriend, Catherine McBanowa. During that trial, Sigfredo Garcia, who was, it's so convoluted, Catherine McBanowa was baby's daddy. So here's what's alleged, that Charles Adelson hired or asked his girlfriend, the woman he was dating off and on, Catherine McBanowa, to hire someone to kill Dan Markel. Allegedly, she hired her baby daddy, Sigfredo Garcia, and Luis Rivera to do the deed. So Luis Rivera pled guilty in exchange for a sentence, a light sentence to be sure. And he turned state's evidence against Sigfredo Garcia, who was found guilty in the first trial. Also in the first trial, Catherine McBanowa ended up getting a mistrial because the jury could not reach a decision on her innocence or guilt. So she was retried, so that's the second trial in this case. So I've heard all of this evidence twice, and right before the dogs are barking, and nothing. Be right back. Guys. Duncan, stop. Duncan, stop. Come on. Now, where was I? So right before the second trial with Catherine McBanowa, the prosecutor, they announced they had filed charges against Charles Adelson, and he was arrested, and he is now in jail waiting for his trial. Meanwhile, Catherine McBanowa, who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, who has 2 little ones at home, not so little anymore, and she decided, hey, after 7 years, maybe I should testify against Charles Adelson in exchange for a deal. So recently, Charles Adelson defense team filed a motion for a protective order to exclude the public from hearing what that testimony will be, including until after, all the pretrial sidebars. They want this protective order to extend all the way until after she testifies at trial, which is kind of unprecedented. Now, I can understand like a gag order before this goes to trial. And they're claiming it's, there's so much publicity on this. And they're right. There's a lot of publicity, but we all know what she's going to say. Charles hired me to do it. He gave me $100,000. I hired my baby daddy. He hired his best friend. They did it. We got the money. Yeah, it's not a big secret. So I don't know what the judge is going to do with this motion, but Okay, so I can't wait to see this because she's already been on the stand twice and saying, nope, I didn't have anything to do with this. It was Charles Adelson. I didn't have anything to do with this. Pretty adamant. I did not have anything to do with it. She benefited from it. Yeah, I won't go into all the details, but yeah, anyway, she had a little bit more involvement than she claimed when she took the stand. So that is that case. Now, the Idaho student murders case, I'm going to be doing a hearing live today. There's a hearing where Brian Kohlberger will appear for a status conference. Now, that just means, at the initial appearance, his defense counsel, she's a public defender, and she indicated she needed more time to review. They needed to review the public probable cause affidavit, which he had only received the night before. So they needed to review the probable cause affidavit. She needed to review it with her client. She needed to review the files. She just didn't have enough knowledge of the case to file any motions at that time, because the judge or the magistrate that heard that said, do you want a bond? And she said, I don't even know what to ask for at this point, because she hadn't really met with her client. So by now this has happened, because that was several days ago. So today I expect, 1, he probably will enter a plea, and 2, she may ask for a bond. Right now he's in jail behind bars with no bond. So we'll see how that goes. And I'll be live at noon to cover that. So let's talk about this retrial of Mark Jensen. So this is a really interesting case. I looked to see if I covered it originally. I did not. Now, at some point, I may have covered some hearings or something like that, because I thought to myself last night, this judge looks so familiar to me, and I still can't place him. So I was trying to research this case. Now, the original judge on this case for the verdict said, this happened in 1998, 2 decades ago. This has been going on for 20-some years. And this man, thankfully, I'm not expressing an opinion, is behind bars this whole time. He's on a $1.2 million bond behind bars. So this happens in 98. He is not arrested until 2002, because it takes the police forever to piece this together. Then the trial happens in 2008. There's a verdict of guilty. He's sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And that original judge was, what was his name? Bruce Schroeder. Here's a picture of him. Look familiar to you? Yep, me too. He was the irritable judge in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. I don't know if you guys remember the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Kyle Rittenhouse was the kid that took the AR-15 and went downtown to the protest and ended up shooting someone and killing them, and severely injuring a couple of other people. Anyway, he was found not guilty. But this judge was not hesitant to dress down the attorneys in this case. So I thought, ooh, we know him, don't we? Well, so this case goes up on appeal. Mark Jensen's case goes up on appeal. The appellate judge says his Sixth Amendment rights to confrontation were violated when a letter and some voicemails that his wife had made to the police. She wrote this letter. She gave that letter to a neighbor and said, if anything happens to me, give this to, officer so-and-so. And she also did voicemails to that officer, all indicating that if something happens to me, he should be a suspect. Now, I'm going to read to you the actual letter. Hold on. I got to find it. So here's the letter. She addresses it to Pleasant Prairie Police Department, Ron Kossman, or Detective Ratzenberger. I took this picture and I'm writing this on Saturday, 11/21/98. November 21st. She's dead by on December 3rd. At 7 a.m. This list was in my husband's daily business planner. So she takes a picture of this list that's in her husband's planner. It's a list of things he needs to carry out killing her. So, not meant for me to see. I don't know what it means, but if anything happens to me, he would be my first suspect. Our relationship has deteriorated to the polite superficial. I know he's never forgiven me for the brief affair I had with that creep 7 years ago. Mark lives for work and the kids. He's an avid surfer of the internet. Anyway, I do not smoke or drink. My mother was an alcoholic, so I limit my drinking to 1 or 2 a week. Mark wants me to drink more with him in the evenings. I don't. I would never take my life because of my kids. They are everything to me. I regularly take Tylenol plus multivitamins occasionally. I take over-the-counter stuff for colds, Zantac or Imodium. Have 1 prescription for migraine tablets, which more use more than I don't know what that means. I pray I'm wrong and nothing happens, but I am suspicious of Mark's suspicious behaviors and fear for my early demise. However, I will not leave. And then she talks about her 2 boys, which their names were David and... I had their names. Hold on. Oh, David and Douglas. Because they... And in the letter, they're redacted because they were minors. So, I will not leave David and Douglas, my life's greatest love, accomplish, and wish. My 3 Ds, Daddy, Mark, David, and Douglas. That's her letter. So that letter, the jury in this new case will not hear that letter. So what happens is that this goes up to the appellate court. It's overturned on a basis of the 6th Amendment, lack of confrontation, because the defense is not able to cross-examine her on this letter or the voicemails. So he gets a new trial. But in 2017, another judge, Chad Kirkman, he just says, listen, I'm going to let this letter come in. And I'm not even going to have a trial. I'm just going to reinstate your guilty verdict. So he reinstates it. So now the case goes up to the Supreme Court. And it is overturned again. And that's why we're sitting here 25 years later for a retrial. Yeah. So a little bit about the opening statements. Well, a lot about the opening statements. The prosecution, these attorneys were really good, really good. Very polished, very professional, both female attorneys, and I thought did a bang-up job in both of their opening statements. The attorney for the prosecution, she started out about talking about Julie Jensen, the person who is Julie Jensen. Julie is well educated. She has some nursing degree, but chose to be a stay-at-home mom. And she showed her pictures of her riding her bicycle with the kids. And at the time of these murders, the kids were 3 and 8, I believe. And she, back in the 90s, she had a bout of depression. She also had a brief affair, like I think it was just a weekend, but it just ate her up with guilt. And she admitted to Mark that she had had this affair. And for the next 7 years, they kept getting harassed. Her and Mark were getting harassed. And by this guy, they thought by this guy that she had had an affair with. They were getting pornographic photographs of penises. And Mark would find the photographs. He'd say, oh, this was left in my car. I found this in the mail. You know, he would bring this to the attention of Julie. And sometimes it was emails from this person. and then sometimes it was, he would send an email and he would attach a photo to the email. And sometimes it was a woman giving a man a blowjob. This went on for 7 years, and the detectives put several traces on the email and the phone and just could not figure. Every time they would put a trace to figure out who this was, the harassment would stop. So till one day, the detective finally told Julie, said, "We're going to do this one more time. Don't tell your husband what we're doing." She told him anyway, and everything stopped. So they suspected that Mark was doing this, but this got all the way up till 1998. But then in the fall of 1998, it stops. But simultaneous to it stopping, we learn that Mark Jensen is having an affair with a woman by the name of Kelly Labonte, a coworker that he had met at this conference. Also at this conference, a different conference, Mark was a stockbroker, and he goes to this conference, and he's sitting, it's late night. They've had a lot of cocktails, and now he's drinking in the bar. Everything's kind of closing down, and he's sitting there with another coworker named Ed Klug. And they're both, wife bashing. And Mark discloses to Ed that he's researching ways to get rid of his wife. So Ed goes back up to his room, and his wife calls him, and he says, "Well, I just had the strangest conversation with Mark Jensen. He's looking up ways to kill his wife." So anyway, so the prosecution was arguing that there was a lot of stuff on Mark's computer, pornographic stuff. I mean, by the time they look at his computer, it is full of porn. So there's no doubt in their minds that Mark was behind the 7 years of harassment. But also on this are emails back and forth between him and his girlfriend, Kelly. And if you fast forward to, in 98, after 2 weeks after his wife dies, Kelly moves into the house. Yeah. And they end up getting married. And guess who is raising David and Douglas now? Kelly Lamonte. Yeah. She divorced Mark Jensen in 2008 or 9. But she still has custody of the boys because obviously he, mom's dad's in prison. She has custody of the 2 boys. Interesting, isn't it? So let me talk to you a little bit about the murderers. The murderer. I'm so used to covering multiple murders. So Julie, again, was having issues with depression. Now, when in the 90s, when she had the depression, it was postpartum depression, which, that happens. So now she's depressed because her marriage is not good. She's, you heard what she said in the letter. She goes to her family physician, and he prescribes Paxil for her. So she's starting to take this Paxil, and according to Mark, and she's not sleeping well. So meanwhile, during this fall of 98, she's been talking to various neighbors and friends and expressing to them, her angst about Mark, how she thinks he's trying to kill her, and she can't leave with her kids because if she does, people will think she's crazy. If they ask, "Why did you leave? Why did you take his kids and leave?" And you say, "Oh, I thought he was trying to poison me," or, because she kept finding these searches on his computer. Like he would leave the computer on and there'd be a search of poisonings. And she said, I didn't want to leave because if I said that to somebody, if I said I left because I think he was trying to poison me, they would think I was crazy. So she wouldn't leave him. Now, in the prosecution's opening, or the defense's opening, their response to that was, hey, every time someone offered to help her leave him, she would refuse the offer of help. So we're going to hear from all these people that she talked to. That's going to be very, very interesting. So meanwhile, she's starting on this Paxil. She's not sleeping well. And the husband says, he calls without taking her to be seen by anybody. He just calls the doctor and says, she's not sleeping well since you put her on this Paxil, and can she get something for sleep? And the doctor gives her a prescription for Ambien. Just 10 pills of Ambien. And so Mark goes to pick up the prescription. This is on December 2nd. So the morning of December 2nd, he gives his wife an Ambien. Now, at this point, she's not feeling well, and she thinks it's because she's not sleeping well. So that night, he gives her another Ambien. Now, you're not supposed to take Ambien in the morning, but at night, he gives her another Ambien. Then the morning of December 3rd, he gives her another Ambien. After his description of her on December 3rd is that she was very, very sick. She couldn't get out of bed. She was lethargic. She was incoherent. And you give her another Ambien? What? He even asked his kids, what do you think I should do? Like, he's consulting kids who at the time were 3 years old and 8 years old. What do you think I should do? And the 8-year-old says, well, mommy's really sick. You probably should take her to the hospital. Now, the defense's answer to that was she refused to go to the hospital. She said, nope, not going to the hospital. And that morning at 9:40, there's a search on his computer about poisoning with ethylene glycol. Ethylene glycol is the main ingredient in antifreeze, and it's not detectable. It's odorless, it's tasteless. You can put it in stuff, and it's not detectable. On autopsies, the medical examiners don't normally check for that. So she's really ill, and he doesn't do anything. He gets up and takes his kids to school, and the defense is saying, well, let me finish this story. He takes the kids to school. He goes to work, comes home at 4:30. She's unresponsive. 911 is called. Everybody comes out, and she's gone. They cannot revive her. Super, super sad. Now, the defense is saying she refused to go that morning to the doctor, to the hospital, and on autopsy, she had contents in her stomach, potatoes and peppers and whatever. So she wasn't too sick to go down and eat something. And Mark left to take the kids to school around 9:15. So she's the one that did the search on the computer at 9:40. Their contention, the defense's contention, is that she committed suicide, and that the jury's not going to hear about the letter or the phone calls, but they contend that all of this was to set Mark up, so that when she committed suicide, they would be looking at him as a suspect for having poisoned her. Meanwhile, she committed suicide. Now, is that how it went down? Is she really that clever that she was framing her husband? I don't know. It's an interesting theory. Yeah. Okay. So the medical examiner, who we're going to hear from, a couple of medical examiners in this case, they did the autopsy. They did not test for ethylene glycol because they didn't suspect it. But they found these crystals in her kidney. Like, ethylene glycol, they say, crystallizes your body from the inside out. It's a horrible, painful way to die. And but they also found some interesting markings on her body, which suggested to the medical examiner that she had died from suffocation. But they had no way to prove this suffocation. what they believe happened, the prosecution believes happened, is that she wasn't dying fast enough with the administration of this ethylene glycol. She would have died eventually on its own. The ethylene glycol would have killed her, but she wasn't dying fast enough, so it was assisting her with the Ambien and with a pillow. But they had no way to prove this. I mean, the evidence supported that there was some suffocation, but they just didn't know how that fit into the puzzle. Fast forward to 2007, we get a jailhouse snitch who we're going to hear from in this case, who's going to testify that Mark informed him of what happened. Mark told him all about what happened and that he had suffocated his wife with a pillow. I can't wait to hear that testimony. Now, the prosecution said, make no bones about it. This guy is a con man. He's a liar. He's in prison. He's doing this to, get something out of it, obviously. But everything he's saying fits with the evidence. Now there's an explanation for what the medical examiner was seeing on autopsy. And nobody else would have known this. Nobody else would have known the stuff that he found out. Now, the defense on their opening said, of course he knew about all this because Mark had the entire case file in his prison cell, and this guy had access to it. I've heard that before from other jailhouse snitches, that they have access to the documents that the defendant is reviewing in his cell. So it's going to be an interesting case. Now, the prosecution believes that they have enough evidence without the letter and the voicemails. Based on what I've heard yesterday, I got to wait to hear all the evidence because, when the prosecution got done, I went, wow, how cruel. What a horrible way for this woman to die. And then after the defense got done, I'm like, is she setting him up? So I don't know which way I would go. I've got to hear everything. So I listened to the first two witnesses, which would be prior to lunch yesterday. The first one was a woman by the name of Ruth Vorwald. She was a neighbor. She said they met back in 1991 when she would be out walking with her child and Julie would be out strolling her child around, and they would see each other and they would say hello. And then Ruth decided she would start a book club, and so she invited Julie to the book club, and that's when they became really good friends and very close. They would, obviously they had the book club, and their kids would have play dates. They would go trick-or-treating together. When Julie and Mark put in a pool, they would invite everybody over for swim dates. And she said that Julie was really an outdoor person. She was riding bikes with the kids. She would be outside playing with the kids. She was very devoted to those children. And she said that on December 3rd, she actually had her sister, who was the second witness. The second witness was named, Sharon Krause, which is Ruth's sister. So Sharon was visiting Ruth at the time, and Ruth and Sharon were out getting their kids off to school, and they saw Mark. And Mark was taking the boys to school, and Ruth thought, wow, that's very unusual. Julie usually does that. I wonder what's up. And she said that was about 9:25 that morning, before the internet search. So then, fast forward that afternoon, her sister comes to her and says, hey, there's a bunch of fire rescue and everything, police and everything over there at your friend's house, Julie's house. And she looks and she goes, oh my God. So the two of them walk over to the Jensen home, and she's thinking, maybe something's on fire, maybe something happened. And she goes up to one of the workers, the rescue workers, and says, is there any, Julie's a really good friend of mine. Is there something I can do to help? What's going on? And he says, I'm sorry, she didn't make it. At which point Ruth said she lost it. And even on the stand, she started crying. But she quickly composed herself. And then she said she saw Mark at the scene, and she went up to him. She said he was standing there having a cigarette, and he just was very showing no emotion, just kind of matter of fact. She said, "You know what, Mark, what happened?" And he just said, "Yeah, she's gone. She's gone." And she felt that his behavior was very bizarre, and he was showing a lot of indifference. Then she went to the wake, and she was standing in line to greet, to go past the casket and then greet, Mark was about 5 feet away from the casket. I haven't been to too many of these, but I guess you go by the casket and then you greet the family. And then afterwards there's a funeral. So she saw Mark while she's standing in the line, and she said he was laughing and joking, and she thought it was so inappropriate. And so she said, I couldn't even go to the funeral because I was just so sickened by his behavior. And then at one point, I don't even remember what the prosecution asked her, but she said, Julie did not commit suicide. And the judge was like, and of course the defense is like, move to strike, non-responsive, and the judge is like, jury is to disregard that statement. You can't give that kind of an opinion, but she got it out there. She's like, Julie did not commit suicide. So I thought, ooh. But what I think he was asking her about whether or not she had ever expressed, Ruth knew they were having marital issues. Julie had told her that. But she said at no time did Julie express to me that she was thinking about hurting herself or any kind of suicidal thoughts or ideations that was expressed to Ruth. She didn't kill herself. Okay. So, and then her sister was on the stand very briefly, and she just kind of backed up what Ruth had already said. So I will continue the testimony in this case, because I think this case is fascinating. Right now, the defendant, Mark Henson, is 60-something years old. So he's been in jail for almost 21 years? 21 years, yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, all right. Now, yesterday I started that bog story. I'm going to continue it today. And interesting, Narrate, one of my subscribers, she left a comment. She goes, the most famous of these bog people is the Tullen Man. Well, guess what we're going to talk about today? The Tullen Man. So my sister actually sent me what CE and BCE means, because they're using dates and they're using the term, like this one actually, all right, let me read this. 1950, Tullen Man was found so perfectly preserved in a Danish bog that the peat cutters who happened upon him fled and reported to authorities that they had discovered a recent homicide victim. Actually, he had been killed between 375 and 210 BCE. Now, BC is before Christ. It's based on the ancient Gregorian calendar, and it's pretty much what everybody uses. But they're trying to transition to a more modern time frame, and BC is sometime in the 1700s, the actual starting point. And so CE means current, and BC means before current, something like that. Anyway, so if you're looking at 375 and 210 BCE, you're talking about something that maybe happened in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s. I'm really horrible with dates. Anyway, so the archaeologists who examined the man first observed the peaceful expression on his face. There's actually a little picture here. If I can get a close-up of that, I'll show it to you. Before noticing the noose around his neck. He had a noose around it. I see it in the picture, the noose around his neck. Radiographs found that his tongue was distended, indicating that he had been hanged. The 40-year-old had been laid in the bog with great care, suggesting he may have been a ritual sacrifice to appease the gods in exchange for a plentiful harvest. Cremation was a more common Danish burial custom at the time he died, but Tullen man may have been interred in the bog to provide the gods with a whole and functioning servant. Oh, that's creepy. Okay. Just okay. That's true. Okay, part 5 tomorrow. Okay, guys. So don't forget, I'm going to be live very shortly. If you're watching this later on, check out the live that I recorded earlier in the day to find out what happened in the Brian Kohlberger status hearing. I enjoyed bringing you the opening statements today in this Jensen trial. Oh, one more thing that I did want to address. If you're looking back on the Murdoch murders playlist, when you pull up that playlist, the playlist is in the order, like the oldest one will be first, and the most recent information about when I provide any information about Murdoch, I add it to the Murdoch playlist, and that will become last. The most recent is last. Don't ask me why. So the order in which you want to watch them would be the first one that comes up, and then you watch the rest of the way through. And actually, it really doesn't matter because I talk about a different subject pretty much in each one of them. If it's a part 2, I'll label it that it's a part 2. So anyway, I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow, if you're not in live, in Crafting and Crying Daily. Bye, everybody. Take care.